6:18 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. The air outside felt sharp enough to bite. "Don't come to the party." Logan Whitmore didn't shout it. He didn't need to. He said it the way people deliver decisions they believe are already settled, casual, dismissive, final. We were standing near the entryway, winter boots leaving faint, wet prints on the mat. Behind him, laughter and music spilled from a phone speaker, bright and careless against the quiet of my home. The heater clicked, then went still again, as if even it was listening. For a moment, I didn't answer. I watched his breath fog in the air, watched the way he kept his eyes slightly to the side, never fully meeting mine. So this is how they do it, I thought. No explanation, no tenderness, just exclusion, served like it's practical. My hands stayed calm at my sides, fingers curled inside my gloves, holding on to warmth and restraint. "It'll be easier," Logan added, shifting his weight, as if the conversation bored him. "You know how people are." He smiled, a thin curve that asked for my agreement without earning it. Somewhere deep in the house, an old clock ticked once, then again, steady as a heartbeat. I nodded once, not acceptance, not permission, just a signal that I had heard him clearly. When the door closed behind him, the silence didn't feel empty, it felt informed. I walked slowly to my bedroom dresser and opened the bottom drawer where I kept things I never announced: letters, receipts, a worn keychain, and one thick envelope with my name typed neatly on the front. The paper was old, the edges softened by time. I rested my palm on it and exhaled, because if they didn't want me at the party, it meant they were very sure I didn't belong there, and they were about to find out how wrong that assumption was. 6:31 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. The house felt quieter than it should have. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table as if it were fragile, though it wasn't. The paper was thick, the seal firm, the kind of official weight you can feel before you even open it. Outside the window, snow drifted in soft sheets beneath the streetlight, and the wind made a low, steady sound along the siding, like the world breathing through winter. The kettle sat untouched. I didn't turn it on. Warmth wasn't what I needed. I sat down slowly, hands resting on either side of the envelope. My wool sleeves smelled faintly of cold air and cedar from the closet. The clock above the sink ticked, patient and indifferent. "Don't come to the party," I repeated silently, testing the words the way you test ice before stepping. They weren't just rude, they were purposeful. They were meant to remind me where they believed I belonged, outside. For years I had learned to hold my face steady when people tried to measure me. In Alaska, you don't waste energy on show, you save it for storms. I looked around my kitchen, the worn chair, the small scratches in the table, the curtain I'd mended by hand, and felt something settle behind my ribs. Not anger, not sadness, recognition. Logan's tone had been too casual to be accidental. The music from his phone, the laughter in his voice, the way he avoided my eyes, he hadn't been delivering an invitation. He'd been delivering control. I slid the envelope closer and ran my thumb along the edge, feeling the slight ridge of the seal. They think I'm alone in this, I thought. They think I'll shrink. My breathing stayed even. My hands stayed steady. The wind tapped the window once, then again, and in that quiet kitchen I realized something simple. If they were bold enough to exclude me, they had already made plans. 9:14 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. Memory carries its own weather. I had lived most of my life learning how to prepare without announcing it. 30 years earlier, Alaska taught me that lesson quickly. I arrived with a suitcase, a promise of steady work, and a belief that quiet effort mattered more than charm. Winters were long, summers brief and honest. You learn to measure twice wood, words, intentions, because mistakes here cost more. I married young, not for comfort, but for partnership. We built slowly. A modest house first, then a small storefront we renovated ourselves on weekends, our hands always smelling of sawdust and cold metal. While others chased faster money, we chose stability. I kept the books, every receipt folded, every agreement dated, not because I distrusted people, but because storms don't announce themselves. When my husband passed, grief didn't empty the house. It refined it. Responsibility settled where noise once lived. I stayed. I worked. I learned how to let time do what force never could. Over the years, people came and went. Partners, managers, acquaintances who spoke loudly about plans and quietly about consequences. I listened more than I spoke. That habit protected me. Logan entered my life much later, during a period when the business needed new energy. He arrived with ideas, confidence, and a smile that suggested urgency. I didn't resist it. I simply noted how quickly he talked and how rarely he asked. Speed can hide intention, my husband used to say. I remembered that. To outsiders, my life looked unchanged. Same coat, same routines, same calm presence. They mistook consistency for limitation. I never corrected them. Alaska had taught me something valuable. Survival isn't loud, and strength doesn't rush. By the time Logan thought he understood me, decades of preparation were already in place, quiet, layered, and patient. 10:02 a.m., Anchorage, Alaska. Charm can feel like warmth until it isn't. Logan Whitmore had a way of filling rooms without raising his voice. He wore confidence like a tailored coat, easy, practiced, convincing. When he first joined our circle, people leaned toward him instinctively. He spoke about growth, visibility, expansion, words that sounded promising when repeated often enough. At first, his attention felt considerate. He offered to take a few things off my plate. He volunteered to handle calls, coordinate vendors, speak on behalf of the business when I was busy. I noticed how often that word appeared, busy, as if it explained everything, as if it excused distance. The red flags weren't sharp, they were smooth. Suggestions framed as favors, decisions presented after they were made. I didn't want to bother you, he'd say, smiling, or, this just made more sense. People nodded. I watched instead how he positioned himself between conversations, how paperwork passed through his hands before returning summarized and neat. Once during a meeting, I asked a simple question about a contract renewal. Logan answered before anyone else could. Already handled, he said lightly. I waited for details. None came. The room moved on. Efficiency, they called it. He liked urgency, liked deadlines that arrived suddenly, and left no room for pause. "We need to move fast," he'd say. "Opportunities don't wait." Alaska had taught me otherwise. Some things survive precisely because they do wait. The most telling moments were quiet ones, when I stopped speaking and Logan continued as if nothing had changed, as if silence meant approval. I let that assumption stand, because assumptions reveal more than questions ever do, and Logan was beginning to assume far too much. 4:18 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. Betrayal rarely announces itself. The first betrayal arrived disguised as progress. Logan called one afternoon with a tone that suggested urgency, not alarm. "We've got a window," he said. "If we act now, it puts us in a stronger position." I listened, pen resting idle in my hand, snow tapping lightly against the window behind me. He spoke about partnerships, about hosting an event that would elevate visibility. A party, he called it. I smiled at the word. I'd learned long ago that parties are where intentions hide behind music. "There's some paperwork," he added casually. "Standard approvals. I'll send it over." The documents arrived neatly bundled, tabs already marked. He highlighted where signatures were needed, glossing over the rest with summaries instead of explanations. "It's routine," he said when I paused. "Nothing that changes your position." The phrasing was careful. So was my silence. I asked for time to review. Logan hesitated, just a fraction. "We don't have much," he replied. "If we wait, we lose momentum." Momentum. Another word used to rush consent. I agreed to look, not to sign. Days later, I learned the event planning had moved forward anyway. Venues discussed, vendors contacted, my name used in conversations I hadn't joined. When I asked why, Logan smiled through the phone. "I thought you were fine with it," he said. "You didn't say no." That was the moment I understood. Permission had been replaced with assumption, consultation with convenience. My absence from decisions wasn't accidental, it was useful. I said nothing then. I didn't correct him. I didn't argue. I simply noted how easily my silence had been spent and how quickly others were learning to spend it for me. 6:02 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. Distance can be engineered. The second betrayal didn't come with papers or phone calls. It came with silence, carefully spaced, deliberately shaped. Messages that once arrived within the hour now took days. When replies came, they were shorter, smoother, finished before questions could form. I noticed it first in small ways. A meeting rescheduled without notice. A vendor I'd worked with for years mentioning a decision I hadn't heard about. Logan said it was approved, she told me, cheerful and unaware. Approved? By whom, I wondered. When I asked Logan directly, he sounded surprised. "I didn't want to bother you," he said. "You've got enough on your plate." His concern felt practiced, like something he'd said before. I thanked him and hung up, my reflection faint in the darkened window. Information began arriving as conclusions instead of conversations. Budgets summarized, plans announced, my role reduced to acknowledgement. Each time I felt the familiar pressure to be gracious, to keep things moving. This is how people step aside, I thought, not pushed, guided. At a brief check-in, I asked for access to the full contracts. Logan laughed softly. "You really don't need to dig through all that," he said. "It's handled." The word landed heavy. Handled means closed. Handled means not yours. I didn't argue. I didn't insist. I listened to the cadence of his voice, the confidence with which he spoke around me. Others had begun to mirror it, deferring to him, copying him first. Authority, once shared, had quietly migrated. That evening, I opened my drawer and touched the edge of the old envelope again. Not yet, I told myself, not until the pattern was clear. It was clear now, and patterns like this don't correct themselves, they escalate. 6:41 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. The moment clarity arrives. The third betrayal came without pretense. We were standing near the end of the dock, the harbor lights blinking against the dark water, breath visible in the cold. Logan spoke as if he were doing me a kindness. "We've already finalized the guest list," he said. "It's better if you sit this one out." I didn't answer right away. I watched a boat ease into its berth, ropes tightening with a soft creak. "Sit this one out," I repeated to myself. The phrase wasn't about the party, it was about permission, about who was allowed to be seen. "I've always been involved," I said finally. Not defensive, just factual. Logan smiled the way people do when they think the conversation is already over. "That was before," he replied. "This is bigger now." Bigger meant louder, younger, controlled. He glanced at his phone, already moving on. "Trust me," he added, "you'll be more comfortable at home." That was the moment it settled. Not anger, not hurt, but recognition. Every delayed message, every decision made without me, every reassurance designed to soften removal. I had been edited out while being thanked for my flexibility. I nodded once. "Of course," I said. My voice surprised me with its calm. At home later, I stood in the kitchen with the heat humming softly, coat still on, gloves folded on the counter. I opened the drawer and pulled out the envelope. It felt lighter than I remembered. Or maybe I was steadier. This isn't about being invited, I thought. It's about ownership. I slid the envelope onto the table and sat down. For the first time since I'd heard those words, "Don't come to the party," I knew exactly what came next. The breaking point wasn't loud. It was decisive. 7:18 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. Quiet determination. The house greeted me with its familiar hush, the kind that settles in after dusk when the wind presses gently against the windows. I hung my coat carefully, smoothing the sleeve as I always did, and stood still for a moment, listening to the low hum of the heater. Nothing felt urgent. That surprised me. I set the envelope on the kitchen table and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. This isn't reaction, I thought. This is alignment. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in months and began laying things out. Folders labeled in my own handwriting, receipts tucked behind correspondence, notes folded once, twice, exactly the way I remembered. Years of habit revealed themselves quietly. There was no anger in the work, only clarity. I wrote dates on a yellow pad, names, places, moments when decisions had shifted without explanation. Each line felt like returning a piece to its proper place. The story, once blurred by politeness, sharpened into sequence. I paused at the window, watching snow drift under the streetlight. Logan believed exclusion would make things simpler. He believed distance would make me smaller. Silence isn't absence, I reminded myself. It's patience. I slid the papers back into the envelope, aligning the edges. The envelope had waited long enough. So had I. Tomorrow didn't need an announcement. It needed intention. As I turned off the kitchen light, one thought stayed with me, calm and unmistakable. Preparation doesn't argue. It proceeds. I went to bed early, the envelope placed neatly by the door, ready for morning. Outside, the wind moved on, indifferent and exacting. Inside, a plan had finally settled into place. 9:03 a.m., Anchorage, Alaska. Preparation begins. Morning arrived pale and quiet. The sky stretched thin with winter light. I dressed without ceremony, choosing the same sensible boots, the same coat. There's no need to look different, I thought. The work speaks for itself. I picked up the envelope and felt its familiar weight lighter now, not because it held less, but because I understood it fully. The office I entered was modest, warmed by a humming radiator and the smell of old paper. The man across the desk didn't rush me. He listened. When I said, "I need precision," he nodded once and waited. Silence did the rest. I placed the envelope between us and let the contents speak in order property records, agreements, payment histories, documents arranged by years of patience. He read carefully, not skimming. His brow tightened at certain lines, relaxed at others. "These holdings," he said finally, tapping a page, "they're insulated, quietly." He looked up, and the venue ownership traces back further than they realize. I felt no thrill, only steadiness. We discussed options without drama, what could be disclosed, what would be revealed only when necessary. He explained timelines, contingencies, how paper moves when it's meant to be heard. I asked questions and received answers, complete and unhurried. Before I left, he said, "They may think tonight is already planned." I nodded. "It is," I replied, "just not the way they expect." Outside, the cold sharpened my breath. I walked to my car slowly, envelope secured, the city moving on as it always did. Preparation doesn't announce itself, I thought. It waits. And waiting, I had learned, is its own kind of power. 6:41 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. The turning point arrives. Snow fell lightly as evening settled, the kind that muffles sound and sharpens intention. I arrived early, not to be seen, but to be certain. The venue glowed against the dark, warm lights behind tall windows, music testing its echo inside. People would arrive soon, confident in invitations they believed were unquestionable. Inside, staff moved with practiced efficiency. I stood near the entry, coat still on, watching details align. A clipboard passed. A door opened and closed. Everything ran on schedule. This is how plans look when they're real, I thought. Quiet, exact. Logan arrived later, laughter already in his voice as he spoke to someone on his phone. He stopped short when he saw me. Just a half step, just enough to notice. "You're early," he said, easy smile in place. "Didn't think this was your scene." "I like to arrive before things get loud," I replied. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He glanced around, then back at me. "You know," he said lightly, "tonight's pretty set. No surprises." The word surprises hovered, careless. A staff member approached with a question addressed to me. "Ms. Mercer," she said, "would you like the doors open now or after the announcement?" Logan's smile paused. "Announcement?" he asked, still casual. I met his eyes calmly. "Yes," I said. "After." Music swelled briefly, then faded. Guests gathered outside, coats brushing, breath clouding. Logan shifted his weight, looking for footing that wasn't there. "What announcement?" he repeated. I didn't answer immediately. I watched the doors, the clock, the room aligning with decisions made long before tonight. This is the moment preparation steps forward, I thought. The doors opened, and the room began to listen. 6:53 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. What paper makes visible? The announcement didn't come with a microphone. It came with a document. A manager approached, envelope in hand, and placed it on the small podium near the entrance. The room quieted, not because it was told to, but because attention had found its anchor. "Before we begin," the manager said, "there's a custodial notice to acknowledge." She looked to me. I nodded once. Logan stepped closer, curiosity sharpening. "This is unnecessary," he said softly, smiling for the room. "We're all friends here." The manager opened the envelope. Paper slid free with a sound that felt louder than it should have. "Effective immediately," she read. "Ownership and authority for the venue rests with Ms. Helen June Mercer." A pause. "Transfer finalized last month. Filed. Recorded." I felt the moment settle rather than explode. Truth prefers gravity, I thought. Logan laughed, quick, reflexive. "That's not possible." "It is," I said calmly, "and it's complete." A second page followed. The manager continued, voice steady. "All event permissions, contracts, and access proceed at the owner's discretion." She looked up. "Ms. Mercer?" I stepped forward. The lights warmed my face. "This wasn't a purchase made for tonight," I said. "It was made to protect continuity." I didn't look at Logan when I added, "and to clarify authority." Whispers moved through the room like a tide finding new shape. Logan's smile thinned, then stilled. "Why wasn't I told?" he asked. "Because consent wasn't required," I replied. The words felt factual, not sharp. The manager closed the envelope. "We'll proceed as directed." Music waited. Guests waited. The venue mind held its breath. What had been dismissed as impossible was now printed, filed, and standing, and paper once seen cannot be unseen. 7:04 p.m. Anchorage, Alaska. When the room chooses. The shift was immediate, though no one announced it. Chairs angled differently. Conversations softened, then stopped. Eyes moved from Logan to me, not with surprise anymore, but recalibration. Authority had found its place, and the room felt it. Logan cleared his throat. "Helen," he said, stepping closer, voice lowered as if familiarity could still negotiate. "This is a misunderstanding. We should talk privately." I didn't move. "We are talking," I replied evenly. "Public is where clarity belongs." A vendor approached, clipboard in hand, waiting. The manager glanced at me for direction. I nodded once. "Proceed as scheduled," I said. "Please ensure all agreements reflect current ownership." The vendor nodded and turned away. The simple compliance landed harder than argument. Logan's jaw tightened. "You're making this awkward," he said, attempting a smile for the onlookers. "There's no need to—" "There is," I interrupted gently. "When boundaries are crossed quietly, they must be restored clearly." Someone near the bar murmured approval. Another guest folded their arms, studying Logan with new curiosity. The music resumed at a lower volume, tentative as if testing the air. Logan leaned in again. "You could have told me." I met his eyes for the first time since the notice. "I did," I said, "months ago, in questions you chose not to answer." Silence answered for him. The manager returned. "Miss Mercer," she said, "your guests are ready." "My guests," I repeated softly, and felt the words settle. I turned to the room. "Thank you for your patience," I said. "We'll continue." As people shifted back into motion, Logan stepped aside, no longer centered, no longer directing. The confrontation ended without spectacle. No raised voices, no triumph, just acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, once given, rearranges everything. 8:16 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. When confidence loses its audience. Logan didn't leave immediately. He lingered near the edge of the room, phone in hand, smile rehearsed and unused. Conversations moved around him now, not toward him. Where he once gathered attention effortlessly, he stood waiting, listening for cues that never came. I watched from a distance as the social current shifted. Guests approached the staff with questions that used to be routed through him. Vendors checked their notes and addressed me directly. Each small interaction rewrote the evening's hierarchy. No announcement was needed. The room had learned. A familiar laugh rang out near the windows, one that used to follow Logan. It didn't tonight. People were polite, still cordial, but caution had replaced ease. Reputation doesn't collapse, it thins, and thinning is visible. Later, a board member pulled him aside. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the posture, shoulders angled away, voices low, careful. Logan nodded too often. He glanced toward me once, then looked down. Authority, once assumed, now required explanation. By the time dessert was served, his name appeared less in conversation, then not at all. Plans were referenced without him. Decisions were deferred to ownership and review. The language had changed. Language always does first. I felt no satisfaction in it, only balance, returning to a system that had tilted quietly for too long. What had been taken for granted was now examined. What had been rushed was now paused. As the evening wound down, Logan slipped out without goodbye. No confrontation followed him. No one needed to chase the moment. Consequences had already arrived. They didn't shout. They settled, measured, public, and lasting. 10:02 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. When the room finally exhales, the venue grew quieter as guests drifted out into the cold, coats lifted from racks, laughter softening into farewells. I stayed behind, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to feel the space once it belonged to itself again. The lights dimmed slightly, warm against the windows where frost had begun to lace the glass. I sat at a small table near the back, hands wrapped around a mug of tea the staff had brought without asking. The warmth spread slowly, steady, and familiar. This is enough, I thought, not the evening, not the outcome, but the feeling of no longer bracing myself. A young server stopped by, hesitated, then smiled. "Thank you for tonight," she said simply. "Not for the venue, not for the event, for tonight." I nodded once, unable to find words that wouldn't overreach the moment. When the doors finally closed, the silence felt earned. I walked the length of the room at my own pace, noticing details I'd missed earlier, the grain of the wood floor, the quiet hum of the heaters, the way the space held warmth even as the night pressed in. Ownership, I realized, isn't just legal, it's emotional. It's knowing you don't have to explain why you're here. Back at home, I hung my coat carefully and opened the drawer where the old envelope rested. I didn't take it out. I didn't need to. Its purpose had been fulfilled. Preparation had done its work. I slept deeply that night, without replaying conversations, without anticipating the next move. Morning could wait, for now peace had arrived, quietly, the way it always does when it's real. 6:47 a.m., Anchorage, Alaska. The morning after certainty. Morning arrived without ceremony. Pale winter light pressed gently against the snow outside my window, turning everything soft and honest. I stood there longer than usual, wrapped in my robe, listening to the quiet hum of the house as it warmed itself awake. There was no urgency waiting for me, no conversation to rehearse, no outcome left undecided. I made coffee and sat at the small kitchen table, watching steam rise and disappear. This is what resolution feels like, I thought. Not loud, not triumphant, just still. I had been told not to come to the party, as if exclusion were power, as if doors only open when someone else allows it. What I learned slowly over years is that real power is built long before it's visible. It's built in patience, in records kept when no one is watching, in restraint when reaction would feel easier. Logan believed control came from deciding who belonged. I learned belonging isn't granted. It's claimed quietly, completely, and without asking permission. I didn't change how I dressed. I didn't change how I spoke. I didn't even change how I moved through rooms. The world adjusted around the truth instead. That felt right. As the morning settled in, I cleared my cup and opened the window just enough to let the cold air in. It sharpened my breath, grounded me in the day ahead. Whatever came next would come on honest footing. If there is one thing worth carrying forward, let it be this: never mistake silence for surrender. Never mistake modesty for lack. Some of us move quietly, not because we are unsure, but because we are already prepared. And when preparation finally speaks, it doesn't raise its voice. It simply stands.